They were the gods and goddesses of the silver screen, worshipped by millions, draped in diamonds and immortalized in black and white. But behind the flashing cameras and red carpet smiles lurked a darkness no spotlight could hide. From secret lobotomies and government surveillance to fatal addictions, violent ends, and scandals too disturbing for their time, these old Hollywood legends didn't just fall from grace, they plummeted into chaos. Stay with us, because what happened after the fame is more shocking than anything they ever filmed. And by the end of this video, you'll never look at classic Hollywood the same way again. Judy Garland, a voice that shook heaven, a life that cracked beneath it. They said she had the voice of an angel, the kind that could stop time and silence a room. Judy Garland wasn't just a star. She was the star. At just 16, she became America's sweetheart, floating down a yellow brick road into cinematic legend. But behind that iconic smile was a child trained more like a racehorse than a human being, fed pills to sleep, pills to wake, and barely allowed to eat. Her life wasn't measured in years, but in contracts, curtain calls, and controlled chaos. As she aged out of innocence, Hollywood had no script for what came next. The studios moved on. The audience wanted younger faces. But Judy, she still had that voice. That impossible, aching thunderstorm of a voice. So she pushed on, show after show, city after city, often singing to keep the lights on. She was a legend performing in lounges, a global icon begging for credit. Marriage after marriage crumbled. Headlines mocked her weight, her moods, her moments of collapse. In public, she sparkled. In private, she unraveled. By the end, Judy had become a ghost of her former self, worn down by the industry that built her, and forgotten by the world that once adored her. She was only 47 when it all ended. But those final years weren't just sad, they were haunting. Because for someone who gave everything to the stage, there was no final encore. Just silence. Montgomery Clift, the face that couldn't lie, and a life that wouldn't heal. He was the kind of beautiful that made directors nervous. Montgomery Clift didn't act like the stars before him. He felt his way through a scene, bleeding real emotion onto the frame. While others posed, Monty trembled. He was vulnerable before it was fashionable, broken before the audience knew how to look for the cracks. In front of the camera, he was electricity wrapped in silk, unpredictable, raw, unforgettable. But off-screen, the man was an enigma trapped in a hall of mirrors. Clift carried secrets like suitcases with no handles, always with him, always heavy, and impossible to set down. His eyes told stories his lips never would, and perhaps never could. Then came the crash. One moment of twisted metal on a winding road, and everything changed. His once flawless face shattered, his jaw wired back into place. Hollywood fixed him, but Monty knew better. Some breaks can't be healed with surgery. He returned to work, yes, but something had changed. His performances became darker, more haunted. His own reflection seemed to turn on him. Directors whispered that he was difficult. Producers stopped calling. The spotlight cooled. He didn't burn out. He eroded. Clift lived in the shadow of his former self, drifting through a world that once adored him but no longer understood what to do with him. His life became a slow fade, not a dramatic exit. And in the end, Montgomery Clift remained exactly what he was in every role, the man who never truly escaped the pain he wore so well. Marilyn Monroe, the dream that dreamed itself to death. She was more than a woman. She was a mirage in soft focus, a smile made of silk and static. Marilyn Monroe didn't just act. She floated, shimmered, teased the edge of something no one could quite touch. To the world, she was innocence wrapped in allure, the ultimate fantasy, in high heels and heartbreak. But behind every close-up was a deeper story, one even she couldn't control. Norma Jean was the name she left behind, a child of chaos, passed from home to home like borrowed furniture. The studios gave her a new name, new hair, new walk, new voice. She became their creation. But no matter how many diamonds she wore or spotlights she stood under, she could never quite outrun the echo of that little girl, always watching from somewhere just behind the camera. She married fame, but it never loved her back. Directors saw her as fragile. The media painted her as a joke with curves. Men called her everything but real. She wanted to be taken seriously, but when she spoke truth, they turned down the volume. Her final years felt like a dream slowly unraveling. Beautiful but brittle, surrounded by whispers, she drifted through rooms full of people who adored her and never knew her. The lights stayed on, but something inside her was already fading, a candle in a sealed room. They say legends never die. But Marilyn wasn't a legend. She was a person, and that was the part no one wanted to see. Errol Flynn, the devil wore a smirk and carried a sword. Errol Flynn didn't walk into Hollywood. He swaggered in like he already owned the place. The accent, the jawline, the grin that dared you to say no. He was the kind of man who looked like trouble and never bothered to deny it. On screen, he was the dashing rogue, the fearless hero, the man who ran up castle walls and into our fantasies. Off screen, the role wasn't so different, only there were no costumes to peel off when the scene was over. They called him Golden. But gold, as it turns out, can rot from the inside. Flynn lived like the rules didn't apply, because for a time, they didn't. He drank like the bottle owed him something, partied like dawn was a myth, and left wreckage behind him wherever he went. And still, the studios cleaned it up. He laughed through trials, scandals, whispers. Everything was a game, and he played to win. But the mirror doesn't lie forever. By his 40s, the roles had dried up. The eyes dulled. The charm cracked. His body, once the very definition of swashbuckling, buckled under the weight of years of excess. He was younger than he looked, but older than anyone should feel. He once said he had lived 10 lifetimes, and he wore all 10 on his face. Errol Flynn died as he lived, suddenly, dramatically, and with a drink in hand. Hollywood gave him legend. Life gave him the bill. Jean Seberg, the girl who was never alone, even when she was. Jean Seberg entered the spotlight like a whisper that turned into a storm. Discovered at just 18, she was cast as St. Joan, burned alive on screen before she even had time to learn the rules of the game. Critics tore her apart. The American film industry labeled her a mistake. But France saw something else, a quiet fire, a gaze that hinted at more than innocence. In Breathless, she became the very definition of cool, a pixie-cut blonde with secrets behind her smile. Without trying, she became the face of a cinematic revolution. But while her fame in Europe soared, her life in America was unraveling, not from scandal, but from surveillance. Jean wasn't just a star, she had a conscience. She supported causes that made headlines uncomfortable, particularly the civil rights movement. That was enough to make her dangerous. The FBI's COINTELPRO program targeted her with surgical precision. They wiretapped her phones, forged letters, and leaked lies to the press. Her personal life became tabloid fodder, not because of what she did, but because of what they wanted the world to believe she did. The damage wasn't immediate, it was cumulative, like a drip of water slowly hollowing stone. Over time, the pressure consumed her. Her career stumbled. Her relationships strained. And though she continued to work, the spark that once defined her grew dim under the weight of suspicion, betrayal, and silence. She was found in her car days after vanishing, alone but never unwatched. Her story was one of talent and courage, buried beneath headlines she didn't write, and a system that never forgave her for caring too loudly. Frances Farmer, the star who vanished into the walls. There was something strange about Frances Farmer from the very beginning. A sharpness behind her eyes, like she had read the final page of the script long before the rest of the cast. She wasn't built for Hollywood, not really. Too blunt for interviews, too intellectual for studio games, and too fiercely independent for a system that expected compliance wrapped in silk. She arrived in Tinseltown with theater training and literary ambition, not dreams of sequins or obedient smiles. That made her dangerous. That made her disposable. Frances had talent, the kind that couldn't be taught, and it frightened people. She gave performances that burned with restraint and left audiences unsettled. But the studio bosses didn't want a woman who thought for herself, who spoke without permission. So when she refused to play the game, they rewrote the rules around her. They branded her difficult, emotional, erratic. Her downfall wasn't sudden. It was orchestrated, slow, and deliberate. Then came the institutions. She vanished from screens and reappeared behind locked doors. What happened inside those walls remains one of Hollywood's darkest legends. Stories of isolation, forced compliance, and treatments meant to erase the parts of her that didn't fit the mold. There are whispers of irreversible procedures, some confirmed, others denied, but by the time she emerged, the woman who once defied the system was hollowed out. Not defeated, but dulled. Frances Farmer didn't die young. She lived long enough to be forgotten. And perhaps that was the cruelest ending of all, not the fall, but the silence that followed. Veronica Lake, the hair fell first, then everything else. Veronica Lake had a face that made the world lean in closer, cool, cat-like, unreadable. But it was the hair that made her immortal. That long, icy blonde wave that draped over one eye like a velvet curtain. It wasn't just a hairstyle. It was an era. And she hated it. The studios saw her as a blueprint, not a person. She played the same role over and over, the aloof beauty, the heartbreaker, the dame who walks in and ruins everything. Audiences ate it up, but Veronica knew she was being erased one film at a time. Behind the scenes, she clashed with co-stars, ignored direction, and refused to play sweet. Hollywood called her difficult. What they meant was, she said no. And in the studio system, that was the beginning of the end. When she cut her famous hair to support the war effort, the magic broke. Women followed her lead, studios panicked. Veronica Lake, once the fantasy every man wanted, was now just another actress with too many opinions and not enough box office heat. The roles dried up. The lights dimmed. She faded, not in a blaze, but in a slow, cruel decline. Years later, someone found her working as a cocktail waitress in a New York hotel bar, serving drinks to men who used to watch her in black and white. When asked if she was really Veronica Lake, she reportedly said, "I used to be." Not bitter, just honest. The wave was gone. The dream dissolved. What remained was just a woman, tired, forgotten, and far too real for the town that once made her shimmer. Peter Lorre, the man who couldn't escape his own eyes. Peter Lorre had the kind of face you don't forget, pale, soft, twitching at the edges. He looked like he knew something you didn't want to know. From his breakout role as a child killer in M, his image was sealed, the outsider, the sinister presence, the soul unraveling in real time. And while the audience flinched, Hollywood leaned in. They saw profit in his unease. He never played heroes. He wasn't allowed to. His voice was too strange, his gaze too unsettling, his presence too real. He became the go-to for the twisted, the haunted, the morally compromised. He shared the screen with legends, Bogart, Bergman, Greenstreet, but never as an equal. He was always the shadow, never the star. And slowly, the roles bled into the man. Lorre spent years trapped in his own typecasting, paid well to be someone he couldn't stand to look at in the mirror. His health declined. His spirit thinned. He turned to quiet forms of escape, the kind that whisper, instead of scream. His career drifted toward parody, cameos, cheap horror, self-mockery. The menace became a punchline. Behind the scenes, he battled pain no script could cure. By the end, the man who once terrified audiences with nothing more than a stare died quietly, largely forgotten by the world he once mesmerized. No grand finale, just the slow, hollow echo of a man who gave everything to a mask that eventually became his face. Lupe Valles, the tragedy they turned into a joke. Lupe Valles never entered a room quietly, not on screen, not in life. She was fireworks in a silk dress, the Mexican Spitfire, who danced, laughed, and shouted her way through Hollywood's golden age like a storm in high heels. Directors loved her fire, tabloids loved her scandal, and audiences couldn't look away. She was passion personified, too much for the time, too real for the roles they gave her. But behind the flair and fanfare, Lupe was sharp, smarter than they wanted her to be, and painfully aware of the box they'd shove her into. They sold her as a caricature, exotic, unpredictable, always a little unhinged. And for a while, she played along. After all, it paid the bills. But typecasting isn't just professional, it's personal erosion. Over time, they weren't laughing with her. They were laughing at her. When her final chapter came, it was immediate and painful. But Hollywood didn't mourn. It smirked. A tasteless urban legend began to spread, something about bathrooms, vanity, and bad timing. It was a lie, but a convenient one. It gave the public an ending they could mock instead of mourn. The woman who burned so brightly was reduced to a punchline. Lupe Valles was more than a headline, more than a wild laugh and a fast car. She was one of the first Latin actresses to break through in Hollywood, and one of the first to be broken by it. Her life was a bold, beautiful tragedy. Her legacy deserved better than a joke. Brian Keith, the strong, silent type who finally broke. For decades, Brian Keith was the picture of quiet strength. Square-jawed, warm-eyed, and unshakable, he made a career out of playing fathers, cowboys, military men, the kind of roles that didn't need many words to leave a mark. Audiences trusted him. He had a presence that made you feel safe, steady, unmovable. But in real life, Keith was a man carrying far more weight than anyone ever saw. He wasn't made for the showbiz circus. His fame was earned through grit, not glamour, from tough westerns to family favorites like The Parent Trap and Family Affair. He worked steadily, humbly, without the chaos that usually trailed stars of his era. But that calm exterior wasn't invincible. Time, as always, finds its cracks. As the years passed, life began to chip away at the man behind the roles. His health deteriorated. The pain became constant. And then came the blow that no character could recover from: his beloved daughter's sudden death. The loss hollowed him, carved something out of him that never returned. Friends said he was never the same after. Brian Keith had spent a lifetime being strong for others, for his characters, for his family, for his audience. But grief doesn't care about strength. In the end, he faced it alone, quietly, the way he lived. There was no scandal, no drama, just a deeply private man who had run out of reasons to keep going. His final act was quiet and heartbreakingly human. Gig Young, the smile that slipped one frame at a time. For years, Gig Young was the charming man in the corner of the frame, the witty friend, the polished suitor, the dependable voice of reason. He was the silver-tongued gentleman Hollywood called when it needed class with a wink. And he delivered again and again. He even won an Oscar for They Shoot Horses, Don't They? A performance that felt too real, too raw, like the mask had slipped just enough for us to see what was behind it. But by then, the unraveling had already begun. He was always performing, even off-screen. That was the trick. The smile, the clever line, the effortless charm. It all worked until it didn't. Behind closed doors, his life was a carousel of broken relationships, stalled projects, and a quiet chaos that never quite made the headlines. He was replaced in Blazing Saddles on the first day of shooting. They said he wasn't well. No one asked for details. He wanted more than the roles he was given, but the industry had already decided what box he fit into. And when the offer stopped coming, so did the structure. His final years were filled with sharp turns, a late marriage, a new start, the illusion of calm. But something dark had settled in long before that last day. No one knew it was the final scene until the credits were already rolling. Gig Young didn't explode. He quietly fell apart, a man caught between who he played and who he really was, until neither could save him from the ending he couldn't rewrite. Dana Plato, the girl next door, who never got to leave the set. Dana Plato was supposed to be safe, sweet, the kind of girl America invited into its living rooms every week without ever wondering what happened when the cameras stopped. As Kimberly Drummond on Different Strokes, she smiled, hit her marks, and became a part of the television furniture, reliable, harmless, untouchable. But no one asked if the real girl behind the character had anywhere to go when the stage lights turned off. The truth is, she never stood a chance. Like so many child stars, Dana grew up inside a machine that packaged innocence for profit. By the time she could think for herself, her future had already been written in disappearing ink. She was dropped from the show the moment her real life started to show. A pregnancy, a struggle, a deviation from the image. Hollywood doesn't like when reality leaks onto the script. She spent the rest of her life trying to get back to the version of herself people remembered, not who she was, but who they wanted her to be. There were desperate career moves, headlines that didn't flatter, and choices made in the dark that the world mocked in the light. It wasn't a fall, it was a slow sinking. Every attempt at reinvention felt like someone yelling underwater. In the end, Dana Plato became a cautionary tale in a business full of them. Not because she failed, but because the industry failed her, built her up, branded her, and left her behind. She was never Kimberly. She was never America's sweetheart. She was just a girl who needed help and never got it in time. Dorothy Dandridge, the spotlight wasn't bright enough to melt the chains. Dorothy Dandridge walked into every room like she belonged there, and for a time, she almost convinced the world she did. She was stunning in the way that made people stop mid-sentence, but her power wasn't just in her beauty, it was in her presence. Controlled, poised, deliberate. She didn't beg for attention, she owned it. When she became the first black woman nominated for a Best Actress Oscar, it looked like the door had finally cracked open. But cracks don't make entrances, they just let the light in to remind you what's still being kept out. Hollywood didn't know what to do with her. Too elegant for the stereotypes, too outspoken for the margins, too complex for the one-dimensional roles they offered. After Carmen Jones, they called her a trailblazer, but no one followed behind her. She stood at the edge of history alone, looking forward and seeing nothing. No scripts, no offers, just silence in place of progress. Off-screen, her life was a balancing act between ambition and rejection, love and betrayal, promise and reality. She fought battles most never saw, carrying the weight of an entire generation's hope on her shoulders while facing doors that never opened, no matter how loudly she knocked. Her final years were quiet, painful, and laced with the kind of loss that doesn't make headlines. Dorothy Dandridge didn't just deserve more, she earned more. But the industry that applauded her from a distance never reached out a hand. In the end, she was a pioneer left standing alone in the wilderness she helped clear. Clara Bow, the girl who had it until it had her. Clara Bow didn't just light up the screen, she ignited it. She was the original It Girl, the face of the roaring 20s, a flapper fantasy with a Brooklyn accent and eyes that laughed even when her lips didn't. When silent films ruled the world, she ruled them. She was raw, electric, impossible to look away from, the kind of star who didn't act so much as happened to you. And for a while, it seemed like nothing could dim her. But Clara wasn't built for the backstage. Fame came fast, brutal, and unforgiving. She rose at the speed of spotlight and fell at the same pace. Behind the glittering premieres and jazz soak parties was a girl barely out of childhood, poor, unprotected, and completely unprepared for the machine she'd stepped into. The press loved her, then devoured her. Rumors spread like cigarette smoke, every lie louder than the truth. She was too wild, too emotional, too sexual, too everything. No one asked why. They just watched. When sound came to cinema, her accent, thick, working class, unapologetically real, became a liability. So did her honesty. She left the screen early, not with a scandal, but with exhaustion. The fame had taken what it came for. Clara Bow spent her later years in near seclusion, her once unbreakable spirit frayed by breakdowns, betrayals, and the trauma that had chased her since childhood. She wasn't destroyed by failure. She was undone by a system that never let her be anything but a product. She had it, yes, but no one ever asked what it cost. Barbara Payton, the blonde bombshell who burned through every exit. Barbara Payton hit Hollywood like a heat wave. She had the kind of beauty that made producers lean forward, the kind of attitude that made them nervous. On screen, she was the perfect storm, sultry, sharp, and unpredictable. By 21, she was starring opposite James Cagney and being groomed for legend status. The future was laid out like a red carpet, and for a moment, she had it all: money, men, magazine covers. But Hollywood doesn't just hand you dreams. It rents them. And when you stop paying, it collects. Barbara's descent didn't come from one mistake. It came from every mistake, in love, in business, in loyalty to all the wrong people. She had a taste for danger and a blind spot for charm. She fell into the arms of men who saw her as a prize, not a person. One relationship ended with a headline-grabbing brawl that left both men bloodied, and her name forever tied to scandal. From that moment on, the industry turned cold. The studios closed their doors. The work stopped coming. But Barbara didn't vanish. She spiraled, publicly, defiantly. Once a contract starlet, she ended up in sleazy tabloid stories, mug shots, and motels where no one remembered her name. She wrote a memoir that read like a confession, raw and unapologetic. It was called I Am Not Ashamed. And maybe she wasn't. But by the end, no one was listening. Barbara Payton died at 39, her once glamorous face unrecognizable, her legacy reduced to a cautionary tale. She didn't fade into obscurity. She crashed into it, bottle in hand, middle finger raised. Hollywood built her up to break her, and it did the job perfectly. George Reeves, the man of steel with feet of clay. To a generation of American children, George Reeves was Superman. Broad-shouldered, bulletproof, smiling beneath that famous curl, he stood for truth, justice, and everything good in the world. He was the ultimate symbol of strength in post-war America, reliable, noble, invincible. But George wasn't made of steel. He was flesh, blood, and quietly unraveling dreams. Before the cape, he was just another actor trying to catch a break. He landed a small part in Gone with the Wind, made the studio rounds, but never quite reached stardom. Then came Adventures of Superman, the role that made him famous, and the role that caged him. Children cheered when they saw him on the street. Parents warned him not to smoke in public. Studios saw him as one thing only. He became a prisoner of the myth he wore. Off camera, George struggled. The work dried up. The respect never came. He was typecast, dismissed, aging out of a role that had never been built to last. And behind the hero's smile was a man sinking under personal debt, professional frustration, and a tangled relationship with a powerful studio executive's wife that blurred all the wrong lines. Then, one summer night, he was gone. The headlines said one thing. The whispers said another. Some called it despair. Others called it something far more sinister. The official story never satisfied the questions that lingered. George Reeves wanted to be more than Superman. But in the end, the suit was all they saw, and perhaps all they allowed him to be. The hero was fiction. The tragedy was real. Sal Mineo, the rebel who never found a cause that could save him. Sal Mineo wasn't built to be a star. He was built to be a spark. Intense, boyish, and hauntingly vulnerable, he lit up the screen in Rebel without a cause as Plato, the troubled outsider who loved too deeply and died too soon. It wasn't just a performance. It was a warning, but no one listened. The role made him immortal at 16, but it also marked him. He was never allowed to grow up in the eyes of the industry, and it didn't take long for them to leave him behind. Mineo had talent, real talent, the kind that could shift a scene with just a look. He was nominated for 2 Oscars before he turned 22. But the system didn't know what to do with a young man who didn't fit neatly into the mold of leading man or lovable rogue. As the teen idol roles dried up, so did the offers. The promise of a brilliant career gave way to stage work, low-budget films, and long stretches of silence. But there was more than career trouble. There was fear not just of fading fame, but of being exposed in a world that demanded secrecy. He lived a careful life, his private truth always one step ahead of public exposure. In Hollywood's golden era, authenticity could be a liability. By the time he was ready for a comeback, there was a buzz, a revival, a new role on the horizon. But one night, just a few steps from his front door, the curtain fell. No setup, no build, just a final act that came too early. Sal Mineo spent his life searching for a role that would let him be fully seen. He found brilliance. He never found safety. Peg Entwistle, the girl who fell for the dream and threw it. Long before the Hollywood sign meant stardom, it was just a row of giant letters nailed into the hills, advertising real estate, not dreams. But Peg Entwistle made it into a monument, not by climbing to the top of fame, but by vanishing into the myth of what it promised. She had talent, real talent, the kind that lit up stages in New York and turned heads in early casting rooms. Peg wasn't chasing celebrity, she was chasing art. And for a time, it seemed like the West Coast might open up for her the way Broadway once had. She signed with RKO, filmed a single picture, and waited for the call that would change everything. It never came. The city was already beginning to forget her. The industry moved too fast. The roles she hoped for never materialized. And in a town built on illusion, rejection feels like erasure. Days before her film even premiered, Peg walked up the long, dry path through the Hollywood Hills and disappeared into the skyline. They say she climbed the H in Hollywood land, the original version of the sign, and left behind only a shoe, a purse, and a note that read like a sigh. The press wrote about it for a few days. The town moved on, but the story stayed. Peg Entwistle became a ghost, not in superstition, but in symbol. A flicker of every dreamer who came looking for magic and found only silence. She didn't fail. She simply wasn't seen in time. Charles Boyer, the lover who couldn't survive the ending. Charles Boyer spent his career whispering in the shadows of candlelit rooms. He was the continental dream, the velvet-voiced seducer who didn't need to chase. He simply waited, and women leaned closer. He starred in classics like Gaslight and Algiers, playing mysterious, romantic men with secrets behind their eyes. But off-screen, there were no mind games, no grand illusions. There was only one woman who ever truly mattered, Pat Patterson. They met in the golden age, 2 rising stars who found in each other something stronger than ambition. He called her his anchor. While Hollywood orbited scandal and spectacle, their home stayed quiet. For over 4 decades, their marriage stood as a rare thing in that world, private, undramatic, enduring. She was his constant. The audience saw Boyer as the ultimate romantic, but what they didn't know was that he played those roles effortlessly because he had already found what everyone else was searching for. Then came the silence. In 1978, after 44 years of partnership, Pat passed away. Just 2 days later, Boyer followed her. Not with fanfare, not with tragedy written in neon, but quietly, deliberately, as if to say he had simply come to the end of his part. His final act wasn't about fame or sorrow. It was about devotion. Charles Boyer, the man who spent a lifetime whispering love on screen, wrote his most powerful line without saying a word. Without her, the story was over. Thelma Todd, the ice blonde who got too close to the fire. Thelma Todd had the timing of a comic and the face of a femme fatale, a rare combination that made her one of the brightest stars of early Hollywood's talkie era. She sparred with the Marx Brothers, traded punchlines with Laurel and Hardy, and ran a successful cafe overlooking the Pacific. She wasn't just another pretty face. She was smart, ambitious, and always 2 steps ahead in a town that liked its women a little slower. But success in Hollywood came with strings, and Todd was tangled in all of them. She had a complicated history with powerful men, producers, directors, even rumored underworld figures. Her cafe, tucked into the hills above Sunset Boulevard, became a glittering hot spot. But it was also a pressure cooker. She was juggling fame, business, a jealous ex, and whispers about mob connections that clung to her name like smoke. Then, one December morning in 1935, Thelma Todd was found dead in her car, parked in the garage of her ex's lover, just steps away from her home. The official word was carbon monoxide poisoning. But nothing about the scene made sense. No signs of a struggle. No suicide note. No easy answers. The investigation was fast, the theories endless, and the truth never arrived. Some say it was an accident. Others say it was a warning. But one thing's certain. Thelma Todd knew too many names and had too much ambition in a town that didn't like women with either. In the end, the laughter stopped. The lights went out. And Hollywood, as usual, looked the other way. They were icons, legends, pioneers, but more than that, they were people. Behind every close-up, magazine cover, and red carpet was a complex human being navigating a world that often demanded too much and offered too little in return. The stars we've explored today didn't just fall from fame. They were pulled, pushed, and sometimes erased by an industry that prized image over identity and myth over truth. Some were failed by the system. Others were undone by silence, pressure, or the weight of their own public personas. And yet, each of them left something behind, a performance, a legacy, a warning, a spark. Their names may have faded from headlines, but their stories still echo through the hills of Hollywood and in the quiet moments between scenes. It's easy to look back on old Hollywood with nostalgia, to see it through soft focus and gold dust. But beneath the glamour lived lives filled with heartbreak, isolation, brilliance, and resilience. A reminder that fame is not a shield, and often, it's the first thing to crack. If these stories moved you, surprised you, or made you see these legends in a new light, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your reflections in the comments. Tell us which story hit the hardest, or whose legacy you think deserves to be better remembered. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the shadows of stardom, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and turning on notifications so you don't miss future episodes. We'll continue exploring the untold, the overlooked, and the forgotten, because the stories that live in the margins are often the ones that matter most. Thank you for watching. And to the stars who shined, even when the spotlight failed them, we remember you.